Hello, I'm Brigantia of Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Sunday. It's time for another Loki video, and this time we're going to be discussing the way he has been nagging me to start learning the runes. And this has been going on for a little while. Now, before I started getting involved with Loki and working with him, I did own 2 sets of Norse runes with the accompanying books. I had these, and more pitifully, I had these. I also had a grand total of 3 books dealing with Norse and Germanic spirituality, myths, and practices. And I had a notebook that was gifted to me by a former Odinist, full of all of his research that he had acquired. And one humble book titled Runes for Beginners by Alexander Chorin. So between this and what I can find in online articles and videos, that's what I'm working with, folks. It does seem likely that my personal library on this topic and associated with, Norse culture and customs and so on, it is going to require expansion as time goes forward. And when I was beginning to work on the outline for this video, I found myself just absolutely plopped into a boiling pot of controversy and conflict. Everything from the meaning of the runes to whether or not it's proper to use them for divinatory or magical purposes, and what's historical, what isn't, and it just even attacks on the various sources and everything. And I encountered this within the first 10 minutes of looking up basic information, because before, all I did if I was doing anything with the runes, I just looked up what their divinatory meanings were, and I just worked from there. Oh, this has been different, and it's quite overwhelming. And simply making note of what the various disagreements are, and what the foundations for those disagreements are, that is a task in and of itself. And I admit at one point during this process, I just closed my eyes and I asked Loki, must I do this? Must I learn about all of this and knowingly take on yet another headache? And his response was, yes, get to work. So here we are. So, the Elder Futhark. Both sets of runes that I own are Elder Futhark, and at this time, that's the only set of runes that I'm really prepared to do research on. If I were to take on every runic system at once, I'd drive myself crazy within a day, and I don't really need the help with arriving at that particular destination. So the Elder Futhark, for those who aren't already aware, and according to the information at my disposal, is the earliest known runic alphabet. The name Futhark comes from the first 6 letters of the alphabet. There are 24 characters in total, and sometimes these characters are described as staves. And these are divided into 3 groups of 8. We have Freyr's 8, Hagal's 8, and Tyr's 8. Now, Freyr's 8 is ruled by fertility gods, and one of the sources I have also calls this grouping Freya's 8. Hagal's 8 is ruled by deities that are associated with various forms of protection. And then Tyr's 8 is ruled by deities concerned with matters of divine justice and order. So I wasn't really sure where to dive right in with this, especially since Loki's never really been particularly associated with the runes, and it's very controversial of well, does he do certain runes, pick up on his qualities or anything else like that? So I thought, well, let me just look at the letters of his name, see what their runic names meaning are, and see if we come up with anything. And this is where I came across it. If we begin with L, which is, of course, Laguz. This is part of Tyr's 8. It has a general meaning of water, bodies of water, the sea or the ocean, lakes, lagoons, wells. It deals with flow, life, renewal, energy, active unseen powers, and well of the weird. Now, the associated meanings with this rune, especially with the imagery of various forms of water, it does evoke a sense that there's more than that lurks beneath the surface than what we could ever possibly dream of. And the potential of transformation and magic and power is implicit in this idea. And the ability for self-transformation, as well as the capacity to shape events, is at the core of Loki's very being, and his actions in mythology, so far as what we know of them, are very consistent with this trait. And this brings us to the letter O, represented by Othala or Othela, depending on whose pronunciation guide you're going by. And this is part of Tyr's 8. It means property, home, inheritance, origins, legacy, the old country, a sacred enclosure, referencing your homeland, your village or hometown, the homestead, the family group, associated customs, lands, languages, as well as the duties and responsibilities involved in maintaining family ties. And the idea of home, it's so much more than just a particular structure that, a family happens to be, living and sleeping in. It is about the ties of history that bind people together and that enables the formation of new ties to carry on into the future. That's essentially what home is about. It's where do we fit in within the larger structure of things. One of my sources also considers this rune to be associated with the idea of separation or retreat. And it would even go so far as to call it the rune of radical severance. Now, this particular meaning, it could be tied into the ideas of inheritance, of one generation taking over for the previous generation. And in the cases of literal inheritance of property or title, the radical severance required is twofold. First, the previous holder of the property and or title dies, thus needing a successor. And two, the inheritor must now take on the mantle of responsibility and sever ties with their previous mode of being. It's also suggested that this rune signals a need to cut ties with relationships that have run their course. And considering Loki's tendency within mythology to kind of shatter the old structure, you need to take on something new, or relationships need to be shifted around. It is interesting that this is just linked with him, if only through the spelling of his name. Now we have K, and we have the Kana's rune, also called Kano or Ken. And it's part of Freyr's 8. It means beacon, torch, internal fire of transformation, transformation again, inflammation in the literal sense, creations, fire, destiny, cunning, command, sexual relationships, or the product of sexual relationships. One of the meanings is to beget. It also means to know. Now, I have come across a few articles that dispute Kanaz being associated with fire in any sense of the term. But I do think it's fair to say that is not the consensus view. And as time goes on and I do more research, I'll be in a better position to say whether or not I agree or disagree with that consensus. But as it is, I do think that having to do with fire is a reasonable interpretation. And of all the elements, fire by far symbolizes transformations the most, and transformations of all sorts, which is the theme I'm picking up the most on when I'm looking at this rune. And Loki has everything to do with transformations. So whether or not he was ever considered to be a fire god or a god of the hearth is really neither here nor there. It's how fire or how the idea of fire is used that justifies it associating it with Loki. Now the last letter in his name, I, Isa, part of Hagel's 8. It means ice, inertia, standstill, withdrawal, and serenity. This is an elemental rune and refers to the primal ice, what's described as an icy stream or a glacier from Niflheim. It has a mythological link with ice giants for obvious reasons, as well as the wisdom that comes with age, of being in the winter of your life or being in the winter of your spiritual life. This rune can denote being bound by frustrations or going through a process of gentle renewal. Context matters, but in either case, it does indicate a need to sacrifice or to let go of the old in order to bring on that thaw, enable new movement, new flows, new beginnings. And it's a process that no one can undertake for us. The change has to come from within. And given Loki's mythological binding, this is interesting. It is interesting how so many of his traits and his acts within mythology are reflected, at least to some degree or another, within the very letters of his name. So whether or not that's significant or not, I think still remains to be seen, but it's at least an avenue of exploration. So what I've gleaned so far is that learning the runes isn't going to be just about memorization or learning how to cast them for divinatory purposes or how they can be utilized in magic. Now, granted, the aforementioned will be playing a role as time goes on, I would imagine, but in the process of preparing this video, I've come to understand, or at least get the sense, that those purposes are not the reason why Loki wanted me to start studying the runes seriously. So in the notebook that I inherited from the former Odinist, there are a few quotes from An Exposition on Runic Practices by Eamon Brooks. Now, the first quote has to do with the concept of orlog, the second with the concept of the weird, and the third regarding how the Orlog and the weird fit together. So, Orlog is the Northern European law of cause and effect. It is very similar in nature to the Eastern philosophy of karma without the reincarnation aspect. The view was that you were born with a clean slate, and what you did with your life from then on was your responsibility. If you got it wrong, then you had to pay the price both in your physical life and in the afterlife. Do good deeds in life would bring good fortune in return and a good death, which would in turn ensure that the afterlife was spent in Valhalla or Sesruminir and not in hell, or if you were a particularly vile creature, Niflheim. Now the weird. The weird philosophy is used to explain the mechanics of the runes. The weird is thought of as a giant spider's web that spreads its strands across time and space, with each strand made up of a different manifestation of energy, the culmination of these energies being the very fabric of the universe. And now for our third quote. The weird and Orlog are interlinked. A person doing a good deed and building a good Orlog will fill his psyche with positive energy. And as that person is on the web, and indeed part of it, it naturally flows that he will be on a positive strand of the web. Because the web is the fabric of life, then his world will be influenced by that positive energy. The link between these ideas and the runes is that if each strand of the web is made up of energy, then to be able to identify the different types of energies, we must give each of them a symbol. The runes are these symbols. On another note, dealing with webs, is that one of the suggested meanings of Loki's names has to do with knots, webs, or tangles. And one of the common signs when Loki is trying to get your attention is the presence of an unusual number of spiders, or spiders turning up in unusual places, to which I can attest. Before I realized Loki was calling to me, not only did I have an absolute invasion of spiders in my home, and at an unusual time of year, but one day I discovered a spider while making the bed. It was quite large. It had been under the covers, not 6 inches away from where my sleeping body had been only minutes before. You will have to imagine my reaction to that. I can't put it into words, not even now, and I'm pretty sure that Loki is still giggling. But this is the point. Loki's association with the weird and its symbols runs deep, and it points to a role he plays in the broader construction of the world, and this role is not discussed all that often. So I think learning about the runes and the weird is going to play a role in better understanding Loki and the journey that he's taking me on, and why. So I've got my work cut out for me, to say nothing of the fact that getting this far has opened up a whole other branch of research. It's good that this is coming up now because it's giving me time to prepare for how I'm going to proceed with my studies in 2022. This is a way of getting into deeper things and ideas I can really sink my teeth into. So it's a gift that will require goodness knows how much work and how much trial and error and contemplation. But this is just what I've been needing, and I am excited to undertake it. So, if you would like to discuss either Loki or the runes or any other kind of pagan topic, please come visit me at Blackbird's Brew. There's a link to join in the description box below. And of course, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.